In the year 1927, as the sun rose over a fractured China, the air carried both the scent of revolution and the shadow of war. This was a nation struggling to breathe, a land torn between dreams of unity and the harsh weight of foreign domination. China had suffered under warlords, invasions, and the humiliation of unequal treaties. But now, a new chapter was unfolding. A chapter that would span over 2 decades, reshape a civilization, and divide a people. This is the story of the Chinese Civil War, a battle not only for power, but for the very soul of a nation. The seeds of conflict were planted long before the first shots were fired. After the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911, China fractured into pieces. Warlords carved territories like hungry wolves, foreign powers hovered over Chinese ports, and the people stood stranded in chaos. In this darkness, 2 forces rose with different visions for China's future. One was the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, led by a man with fierce determination, Chiang Kai-shek, a military commander forged by discipline and ambition. The other was the Chinese Communist Party, inspired by ideology, united by shared hardship, and led by a rising figure whose influence would one day reach beyond borders, Mao Zedong. In the beginning, believe it or not, these 2 forces were allies. Bound together in the first united front of the early 1920s, they sought to defeat the warlords and reunify China. Together, they marched in the Northern Expedition, city by city reclaiming the nation. For a moment, it seemed like China had found its path. But alliances built on convenience rarely survive the weight of power. As the Nationalists gained strength, fear and distrust grew. Chiang Kai-shek saw the Communists not as partners but as a threat lurking inside his movement. And in April 1927, in Shanghai, the fragile alliance shattered in a wave of violence known as the Shanghai Massacre. Nationalist troops stormed the streets, hunting down communists, killing thousands, and igniting a civil war that would burn for the next 22 years. The communists, scattered and wounded, fled into the countryside. It was here, among peasants and farmers, that Mao Zedong's vision began to take shape. He believed that China's strength lay not in the cities controlled by elites, but in the vast rural lands where millions of peasants lived. Mao rebuilt the movement from the soil, teaching that revolution could rise from the fields. Villages became strongholds, mountains became battlegrounds, and the countryside turned red with ideology and sacrifice. Chiang Kai-shek, determined to crush this growing force, launched a series of encirclement campaigns. Nationalist armies surrounded communist bases, tightening the noose with every military operation. By 1934, the situation became unbearable. The communist leadership made a decision that would change history. They would break out, abandon their stronghold in Jiangxi, and embark on a brutal, desperate retreat across some of the harshest terrain on earth. This was the Long March. The Long March was not merely a retreat. It became a legend, a defining epic of endurance. Nearly 86,000 men and women began the journey. They crossed icy mountains where soldiers froze in their sleep, swamps that swallowed entire units, and battlefields drenched in blood. They walked over 9,000 kilometers, enduring hunger, disease, and relentless pursuit. But out of this suffering emerged a narrative of survival and unity. During the march, Mao Zedong's leadership solidified. His authority became unquestionable. By the time the Communists reached their new base in Yan'an in 1935, only a fraction of the original marchers remained, but they carried with them an unstoppable spirit that would eventually reshape China. As the Civil War continued to simmer, a larger threat crashed into China like a storm. In 1937, the Empire of Japan launched a full-scale invasion, dragging China into one of the most brutal wars in human history. The Chinese Civil War paused, not by choice but by necessity. The Communists and Nationalists formed a fragile Second United Front to resist the Japanese invasion. Yet even while Japan occupied cities, even as Beijing and Nanjing fell, even as millions were killed, both sides quietly prepared for the inevitable. The Civil War would resume the moment Japan retreated. China was fighting 2 wars at once, one for survival and one for the future. During the war against Japan, the Nationalists suffered heavy losses. Their armies bore the brunt of major battles, their cities were devastated, and their government drained its strength. Meanwhile, the communists expanded their influence in the countryside, building support among peasants through promises of land reform, justice, and equality. By the time World War II ended in 1945, the balance of power had shifted. China celebrated victory over Japan, but peace was only an illusion. The long-delayed storm was returning. In 1946, the Chinese Civil War erupted again, fiercer, larger, and more decisive than ever before. The Nationalists, equipped with American support, held major cities, railways, and infrastructure. They had more weapons, more soldiers, and more international recognition. But the Communists had something far more powerful: the support of millions of ordinary people, hardened soldiers who had survived the Long March, and commanders who understood guerrilla warfare better than anyone alive. The battles that followed reshaped the nation. In northern China, Communist forces seized Manchuria, capturing vast stores of weapons abandoned by the Japanese. This gave them the firepower they had lacked for years. Momentum shifted rapidly. The Nationalists, plagued by corruption, inflation, and low morale, began losing city after city. Communist generals like Lin Biao and Liu Baching orchestrated brilliant campaigns, cutting off supply lines, encircling entire armies, and winning victories that shattered nationalist confidence. One by one, major nationalist strongholds collapsed. In 1948, the Liaoshen campaign shook northeast China. Soon after, the Weihai campaign engulfed central China in a devastating struggle that destroyed the nationalists' best forces. And the Pingjin campaign delivered the north into communist hands. In less than 2 years, the nationalist defenses fell like dominoes. By early 1949, the fate of China was sealed. Chiang Kai-shek, realizing the capital could no longer be defended, retreated south. Nanjing fell, then Shanghai, then the rest of the mainland. And on October 1, 1949, standing atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace in Beijing, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. A new era had begun, born from decades of struggle, sacrifice, and revolution. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of the nationalist government fled to the island of Taiwan, vowing that the war was not over, that one day they would return. But history had turned its page. China was split in two: one mainland, one island, a division that would shape global politics for generations. The Chinese Civil War was more than a conflict between two armies. It was a transformation of society. It was the rise of ideology over tradition, the triumph of rural masses over urban elites, and the remaking of China's political landscape. It left millions dead, families divided, and memories that still echo today. But it also forged the China we know in the modern world, powerful, centralized, and forever marked by the choices made in those 22 years of fire and revolution. And as we look back at this turbulent chapter, one truth becomes clear: the Chinese Civil War was not simply a fight for power. It was a battle for identity, for survival, and for the destiny of a nation that refused to remain broken. A nation that bled, marched, and endured until a new dawn rose in the east, the dawn of a new China.